Hello everyone, Stes here again, and today I have the review of Daft Punk's Random Access Memories. Daft Punk are a French electronic duo, came around in the 90s if I can remember correctly. They're pretty renowned for their dance music. If you haven't heard of them, I'd be kind of surprised. In terms of their genre, style, they mostly feature around house. They have a wide variety of influences from R&B, disco, a lot of retro sounds. A lot of their stuff incorporates a lot of electro rock type stuff rather than just electronic music. Random Access Memories is their fourth studio album, following Homework, Discovery and Human After All. In my opinion, Homework is definitely the best. That's in my opinion, remember. And I should say before I do this review, all of this stuff is my opinion. I'm happy to hear yours, but this video is my opinion and not yours. So, you know, if you differ in opinion, don't get mad. It's just, you know, we're all human. We have different opinions. Sadly, I feel like I need to actually say that at the start of every single video because people don't seem to ever get that. So yeah, I think Homework was the strongest album. It was very much basic in house. It didn't really go out of the boundaries too much. Whereas Discovery and Human After All did kind of experiment around a bit, but they didn't really. A lot of the stuff seemed kind of a little bit uninspired and lacked energy, that sort of stuff. But you know, I'm not sure if everyone shares that opinion, but that's what I think. I know a lot of people do think that Homework is the best though. So yeah, Random Access Memories continues in their kind of homage to the past. A lot of 70s and 80s references you can hear in here. And not only in actual sound, but also in like beneath the surface. I'll actually go through a couple of bits in there where how they do that. So in terms of production, pretty solid, you know. What you'd expect really. It was, you know, there's some songs on this album which are really quite detailed in the different sounds in there and the different layers, and it's really quite intricately balanced, and it's really nicely how they've done that. I think it was only the closer which I thought might have been a little bit, yeah, but yeah, I'll get to that. So the opener, Give Life Back to Music, opens with this kind of like a rock intro, and the rock section kind of comes through in and out of the song, but it quickly develops into just a generic Daft Punk song. I don't mean generic as in a bad way in this song. You know, it's funky, it's chill, it's got the vocoders all there, and you know, it's just typical Daft Punk song. Decent, solid track, catchy, enjoyable. I don't have much more to say about it. If anything, it might be a little bit bland, a little bit it's a bit safe, but you know, I enjoyed the song. I don't think it's too bad. Certainly not as uninspired as I think that some of the tracks on Human After All and Discovery were. Mostly Human After All. Discovery wasn't too bad. The Game of Love, it's a song which really kind of has some influences from the 80s in particular, and this is actually one of those tracks which has a lot of detailed instrumentation in it. I recommend you guys listening to it a couple of times and, with a decent quality, and you'll actually kind of pick up the amount of detail that is underneath in the instrumentation. There's a lot of subtle sounds that's in there that yeah, that really don't stand out if you're just listening to it as a background song, but when you really focus on it, you can really pick up on these things. I wasn't really a fan of the vocals. The vocals in the vocoder, like the robot voice, and they're meant to convey a lot of emotion and expression, but they kind of fail to do so. And there's another track on this album which has the same problem. They just kind of seem a bit lackluster, uninspired, and just a bit flat, really. And, you know, whether that's the fault of the actual vocoder, I don't really know. It'd be hard to tell. You'd have to have it put next to another version of the track where there's actual normal vocals. So, but either way, yeah, I wasn't a fan of the vocals in this track myself. Giorgio by Moroder. This track is probably the most ambitious on the album, and also one of my favourites. And this one has a pretty big backstory. This is what I'm meaning. How this album has a lot of influences from the 70s and 80s, but not necessarily just in sound, and I'll go over that now. So it features Giorgio Moroder, who is a Italian-based electronic music producer, and he was one of the pioneers in electronic music. Some of the really early stuff came from him, and the song features a large amount of monologue from him, which is basically talking about his journey into it. How like he wanted to create some music which, you know, had sounds from the 50s and 60s, but also sounds from the future, and he found that in the synthesizer, and went on from there. He didn't realise how much of an impact it would have, and that sort of stuff. And the song really represents the whole album concept as a whole, as, you know, it's meant to convey like freedom in your musical endeavors, basically. You know, when Giorgio was first creating his music, you know, there wasn't really any electronic music out there. There was no preconceptions of what he was doing. He just did what he did and went on from there, and people liked it, and that was just it. So yeah, and that the whole album as a whole is kind of it's meant to convey that theme. It's meant to be really free and just doing whatever it wants. I don't really think it does the best job of it. I'll get into that, but at the same time, that's what the intended theme is. And another thing, the monologue's actually recorded with a series of microphones. I think he was in a booth with a number of microphones from the 60s all up till today, and they actually use the recordings from these different microphones as the monologue goes on. So, for example, like at the start, when he's talking about when he was living out of his car and just trying to produce music, like that's, that would be recorded with the 60s mic, and it builds up throughout. It was kind of an interesting thing. Like, you can't really notice even the 60s microphone is too good a quality to really pick up, but it is there, which is kind of an interesting detail they put in there. Fun facts. The song introduces with the monologue, and it kind of the monologue comes in and out throughout the track with different parts, but in terms of the actual instrumentation, it's comes in with quite a chill house down tempo. It has this really warm synthesizer, which is the typical sound that you get from that the analog synthesizers they use. It takes most of the presence in terms of the melody, but there's a couple of detailed background instruments that you hear in there, like a 70s styled keyboard, which is this really warm sound as well, which features throughout. And I think there's actually a solo in there with it at some point. And the typical funky twangy guitar that they've got in almost all of their standard songs. So after the crescendos, it kind of builds up as it goes along, and brings in this orchestral part. After, I don't know if it was after, I think it was after the second last monologue. It was a little bit forced in the transition between the monologue and this orchestral bit. It felt a little bit unnatural. It wasn't too bad. It was just, the orchestral melody was also a little bit cheesy, but it did the job. I'm not hating on it too much. But yeah, the song builds up with more sounds, the original melody as well as this orchestral melody in the background, and it really builds up and kind of explodes as the song ends. And the drums are quite prominent as well. It almost finishes off more of a rock song, like there's some distorted guitars in there that really build up the song, and it does a good job of it. Overall, I think it's a really great track. It's one of the more ambitious ones on the album, as I said, and they really pulled it off. Some of the transitions, as I said, were a little bit choppy, weren't overly natural, but it wasn't too bad. It's just probably something to get used to. The fourth track, Within, unfortunately, I don't really hold the same standards to. This was probably the weakest track on the album, in my opinion. A lot of people actually loved it though, so I understand that this is my opinion why I don't like it, so be aware of that. It features Chili Gonzalez on piano, and it's another one of those slower songs like The Game of Love, but in the same way The Game in Love kind of failed to convey that emotion and expression with the vocals. It kind of does that again. However, this one kind of screws up the instrumentation as well. The Game of Love had some really great instrumentation, which kind of pulled it through as a decent track regardless. But in this, like, Chili Gonzalez piano melody is really quite generic. It's not bad, it's just, you've heard it all before. And there's nowhere near the detail that's in The Game of Love. This is just, it's completely focused around the piano. It's got, a couple of other instruments in there as well, but, it's focused on that piano. And the fact that the piano is a little bit generic as well as the vocals fail to do what they're supposed to do, I felt the track was really quite uninteresting. But it was the weakest track on the album. It's not an awful track, so it's a good sign. Instant Crush features Julian Casablanca on vocals. He's the singer from The Strokes, which is a rock band, which is a little bit different to what Daft Punk do. But this song overall was kind of, it was a bit of a rock tune. It was a really good choice to have Julian's vocals on here as well. They fit really, really well. He didn't actually have any influence in the song, I don't believe. Daft Punk did, but yeah, so it's still a bit of a rock tune regardless of the fact that Julian didn't actually contribute to the song writing. In the verse, it's very much a rock tune. Like, the synthesizers are almost unheard. They come much more prominent in the chorus, and they're the really thick, warm analog synths that you hear, and I love them. I really do. Pretty catchy chorus. Overall, it's just a nice rock tune. It's tight. I couldn't really fault this really. It was just, it set out what it meant to do. It even features a bit of a guitar solo in there, which fits really nicely. And yeah, it's one of the songs on the album which is a little bit different to Daft Punk's regular style, but it really pulls it off well. Lose Yourself to Dance is a pretty standard pop tune. It's really catchy, bit of a slow-paced, heavily influenced on beat. It features Pharrell Williams on vocals. It was a really good choice, I think. He fit the song really well. It was a really great dance track. The robot voice filled in really nicely as background vocals. But the song is really repetitive, and it got really tedious towards the end. There was little dynamics in the song itself, and I found myself getting quite bored towards the end. So yeah, the song itself is really good. It really should have been cut down to at least 4 minutes, because I think the song is like 6 minutes and it doesn't really change up much at all other than a small interlude. And yeah, it's the fault of some of the more poppy tracks on this album. But yeah, as I said, it's a decent track itself. It's just too long. Touch. This is probably one of the other tracks on the album which is a little bit weaker. Not because it's got too bad, it's just a bit all over the place and not really in a way that's nice. Kind of had this ambient intro, meant to be like a bit creepy and horror. I don't know if it really pulled it off too well. That didn't really bother me. It was, it was just an intro. And Paul Williams comes in on vocals, and it's kind of this. It's really heavily focused on him. It's almost a cappella. With a slight instrumentation in the synthesizers in the background. His voice is really great for this. It conveys a lot of emotion, a lot of expression. Maybe they should have got him for those other tracks. And I really like his part in it. I like that section where his vocals are the main part, and I really thought that was effective. I would have liked to see that continue even if it would progress throughout the song, but they kind of just cut off. The song just went into this kind of like 70s pop melody, but I don't know, it just, it was kind of generic. It wasn't too bad, but after that it just kind of it changed up throughout a bit, and it kind of felt like it lacked direction overall. His vocals come back in at the end, but they kind of lack energy compared to the start. So yeah, the song overall was just really disjointed. It was a bit confusing to listen to. It probably should have even been cut into 2 parts maybe. But yeah, unfortunately I would have liked to see more of Paul Williams on this track, but regardless, his part was really good. Get Lucky, I'm sure everyone's heard of this one if you're into Daft Punk, and if you're even remotely familiar with them. This is their lead single that's been out for a little while now. It again features Pharrell Williams on vocals, another good choice. He's really good for these really poppy tracks. Yeah, it is a really catchy pop tune. There's nothing new. That's, it's not really too much to be expected from a lead single. Instrumentation on this track really kind of bothered me. It was really generic for Daft Punk. It's just, if Daft Punk, if you could condense all of their songs into one, it would kind of sound like this. It's just, and not in a good way, it's just, they're just going through the motions, and it's really lacked energy, lacked inspiration. So overall, I think the song was actually kind of carried by Pharrell's vocals, which isn't really the way you want to have it if he's just a feature. That's kind of how it worked out in my mind. So the song really drags out as well. I think it's another track which is like 6 minutes long, and again, it's only got like this short interlude in amongst it, and yeah, it's another one which really needed to be cut down to be an effective pop tune. Beyond, this track was actually a nice bit of a change up. It featured a lot of orchestral parts, particularly the intro. It had this really big introduction with the orchestral band. Thankfully it was nowhere near as cheesy as it was on Giorgio by Moroder. It's kind of like a down-tempo house track. Got these vocoders in there, the robot vocals, and they really fit on this track, I think. I really loved the vocal melody in this track. I really loved all the melody in it, the vocal melody, the background orchestral melody, and as well as the main synthesizer melody. It almost reminded me a little bit of Space Oddity, both in some of the parts of the melody. Sorry, I'm overusing the word, but there's not really much else I can describe it with, and the mood even was a bit similar to it. It was a really good solo track. I really enjoyed that. Motherboard was another bit of a change up, and I didn't mind this one either. It's just an instrumental, kind of a bit of a relaxed instrumental. It again features a fair bit of orchestral parts. Particularly towards the start, it has this like repetitive woodwind section. It reminds me a lot of Philip Glass. It's really effective. It's not like a bad repetitive. It's really beautifully detailed. There's a lot of, particularly towards the start of the track, you notice how many different details are in there to make this full sound. It does kind of lull a little bit towards the middle though. You know, it just doesn't really move anywhere. It just stays in that same plane and doesn't really progress at all. It goes into this interlude where it's got these water samples, which is interesting, but you know, and then kind of moving back into how it started off with a more prominent drum beat. So yeah, it was a good track. It had this, especially towards the start, it had that great detail. It did lack in progression a little bit, which is a bit of a shame. I think this could have really, I think an orchestral crescendo towards the end would have actually made this track one of the best on the album, but you know, it kind of lacked in direction a little, so that was unfortunate. It's still a great track though. Fragments of Time features Todd Edwins on vocals. It's a really heavily R&B, soul influenced track. It's got this really bright and catchy chorus, which is quite nice. The verse was a little lackluster. Instrumentation again was a little bit uninspired on this track. I don't know, again it kind of felt like it was just going through the motions. Even as the song kind of crescendoed towards the end, it still felt a little bit flat. It still felt like it lacked energy. It's not a bad track at all, it's just a little bit lackluster. Doing It Right features Panda Bear of Animal Collective, of a band who I'm actually really fond of. It's a pretty standard vocal melody that you'd expect from him. It's almost like it was taken directly from Animal Collective and pasted over a Daft Punk track. Though it did seem a little bit forced. It didn't have the energy that I'm used to hearing from him. Had very minimal instrumentation. The drum track and bass basically made up the whole song. There's some subtle other sounds in there, but that was basically it. The robot vocals were quite nice as background. You know, I thought they were quite effective. But yeah, overall, again, it was meant to be a bit of an anthem, this track, but I think it did just lack energy. And as I said, like a few of these tracks have lacked energy, and I hate using the word over and over again, but you know, it's the best one I can think of. So I'm not good with synonyms, so whatever. Yeah, it felt quite forced rather than natural and free, how it's meant to sound. And then the closer, Contact, was kind of this spacey influenced synth-based song. It's the only track on the album which features an external sample, which you hear kind of towards the start. Kind of continually builds up as it goes along. A drum and bass style drum beat comes in, which really gives it a sense of urgency. It builds up and finishes in a kind of a similar way to Giorgio by Moroder did. You know, it's got the synths, it's got the orchestra, it's got the guitar and the fast drums and everything. It's really built up there. It did feel a little bit flat though, as I said towards the start of the review. It was, I don't know whether it was the production, I think it must have been, or the other possibility is it was quite repetitive. It was about 6 minutes long, but there was probably only about 3 sections of build up, and you know, they went on for quite a while each, so you know, it did feel a little bit flat. So yeah, another track that lacked energy. I know you're probably sick of that word, sick of that phrase by now, but so it was a little bit of a disappointing close. But at the same time, it was still a good track. Like a lot of these tracks lacked a bit of oomph. They weren't what they could have been, but they weren't bad tracks. Like they were still decent on their own. So yeah, overall, I'm going to give this album a 7 out of 10. Pretty ambitious for a Daft Punk album, as opposed to what they've done in the past. You know, they've brought a lot of different genres in there. There's a lot of variation in this album. They've experimented a lot with the different genres and different influences. However, it's not really anything new for music in general. A lot of these genres, they incorporated quite generic parts, or nothing new at least, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just some parts, like on Fragments of Time, it was just a really generic pop beat. Overall, the production was pretty damn good. Some of the details really shone through, especially on Motherboard and The Game of Love. A couple of the songs did feel a little bit lacking in energy, whether that was the production or just songwriting in general. Some of the repetitiveness could really contribute to that as well. I felt like a lot of these songs did play it a little bit safe in terms of their songwriting and instrumentation, particularly the more pop-based songs. There wasn't necessarily anything wrong with them, I just felt like the more experimental parts on this album had some of the most strongest stuff. Overall, it was quite varied or inconsistent, whatever one you want to look at. But it was pretty decent in quality. There was only that one song, Within, which I really didn't like. The rest of them, all I'd be pretty happy to listen to again. There's some really stellar tracks on there. You'll see them in my favourite tracks list. And there's some not so favourite tracks. So it doesn't stray out of any boundaries too far, but at the same time, it does experiment around with some different genres. And yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate bands which go out of their comfort zone, and I think for Daft Punk they were going out of their comfort zone. Now that they might be a little bit more comfortable with some of these genres, hopefully their next release might incorporate some more mature influences. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. I'm interested to see what your opinions are on the album. Remember, this is completely my opinion in this video, so don't hate if you don't agree. You know, just be aware that I'm a different human being to you, which is good. And yeah. I'll see you guys next time, and goodbye.